Some names and details in this story have been changed for anonymity and confidentiality. Not all photographs are from the actual scene.
On October 12, 2014, at 7:45 in the morning, video surveillance cameras at the entrance to the south gate of the Grand Canyon National Park captured a gray Honda Civic sedan. The driver was 26-year-old Tina Medina, a graduate student in the Department of Geology at Northern Arizona University. She was smiling as she handed the ranger a pass, looking like a person ready for the best adventure of her life. This was the last confirmed image of Tina Medina until 5 years later, on November 14, 2019, a group of cavers would find a creature who had once been a woman in a remote cave. She will sit in the darkness, covered in mud, with hair as white as snow, and will not say a word about what has been watching her from the darkness for these 1,500 days. On October 12, 2014, at 7:45 in the morning, video surveillance cameras at the entrance to the south gate of the Grand Canyon National Park captured a gray Honda Civic sedan. The car was driven by 26-year-old Tina Medina, a graduate student at the Northern Arizona University's Department of Geology. According to the report, she was alone in the cabin, smiling at the ranger at the checkpoint and looking completely calm. This is the last confirmed image of the girl before she dissolved into millions of years of geological history. Tina was heading to the Lipon Point parking lot, a remote lookout on the southern rim of the canyon. Her goal was the Tanner Trail, known for its difficulty, lack of water sources, and steep elevation changes. For an unprepared hiker, this route could be deadly. But Tina was no amateur. Her professional Osprey backpack contained a 4-day supply of food, topographic maps, and specialized equipment. She planned to descend to the Colorado River, conduct a rock survey, and return. At 8:15 in the morning, Tina's cell phone picked up the tower's signal for the last time. She sent a short text message to her mother. "The connection will be lost in a couple of minutes. I'll be back on Thursday before lunch. Love you." The phone was never registered in the network again. Geolocation data confirmed that the device was located directly at the beginning of the Tanner Trail at the time of the message. Tina was wearing a bright orange windbreaker, clearly visible against the red rocks, and gray hiking pants. Thursday, October 16th, was the day when the silence turned to anxiety. Tina didn't get in touch at the scheduled time. She didn't show up for her scheduled shift at the university campus in Flagstaff, which was out of character for her. The parents, who initially tried to attribute their daughter's silence to communication problems in the deep gorges, contacted the police that evening. The report of a missing person was received at 19 hours and 30 minutes. The park rangers immediately began an investigation. The patrol arrived at the Lipon Point parking lot 40 minutes after receiving the tip-off. Tina's car was parked in the same spot where it had been captured by cameras 4 days earlier. The car was covered in a layer of dust, locked, with no signs of forced entry or struggle around it. Inside, on the passenger seat, there was an unfolded paper map of the park and a crumpled receipt from the Summit Hut outfitter in Tucson, dated October 10th. This proved that the girl had prepared for the hike in advance and acted according to plan. On October 17th, at dawn, a large-scale search and rescue operation began. The search area covered a difficult area around Tanner Trail, including dangerous landslides and sheer cliffs. The operation involved Department of Public Safety helicopters, canine teams, and volunteer groups on foot. Tanner Trail is a 9-mile grueling descent. The rescuers checked the route meter by meter as they descended to the Cardenas Butte neighborhood and onto the river. The air temperature reached highs during the day and plummeted at night, reducing the chances of survival with each passing hour. The first 3 days of intensive searching yielded no results. No traces of shoes that could have belonged to Tina, no remnants of food or equipment. The canyon looked empty, as if the girl had disappeared as soon as she stepped on the trail. The breakthrough happened on the 5th day of the search. One of the hiking groups working in the Bravo sector noticed an unnatural colored spot on the slope. Through binoculars, it looked like a bright smear of paint against the dull limestone. It took the group 3 hours to get to the object, using climbing equipment. It was an orange piece of synthetic fabric that had gotten caught on the thorny branches of an old juniper bush. The discovery was made 2 miles from the official Tanner Trail, in an extremely dangerous area bordering the vertical cliffs of the Palisades after desert. An examination the next day confirmed that the fabric fragment was part of the North Face windbreaker Tina Medina was wearing. The edges of the fabric were torn, which could indicate a fall from a height or that the girl was wading through the bushes in a panic. The question of why an experienced hiker deviated from the marked route for 2 miles towards impassable rocks remained open. The main version of the investigation was an accident. Detectives suggested that Tina could have become disoriented due to dehydration or heat stroke, wandered off the trail, and fallen off the ledge. The cliffs in the area are thousands of feet high. The body could have fallen into an inaccessible crevasse or been covered with rocks. By the end of October, search teams had scoured the foothills of the Palisades after desert using drones and thermal imagers. They checked every crack, every cave available for inspection. But the canyon was silent. No other trace was found, except for a piece of cloth. On November 1, 2014, an official representative of the National Park Service made a statement about the end of the active phase of the search. The chances of finding Tina Medina alive were recognized as 0. The case was reclassified as a body search and later as a missing person case. Tina's car was evacuated from the Lipan Point parking lot, and her name was added to the long list of people taken by the Grand Canyon. For several months, Tina's parents came to the edge of the abyss, peering at the red rocks, hoping to see at least some sign. But the wind only blew dust over the desert slopes. No one could have known then that Tina Medina's story did not end with her death. No one could have guessed that the most terrible discovery awaited people not at the bottom of the gorge, but where the sun did not look. Exactly 5 years, 1 month, and 2 days have passed since Tina Medina sent her last message. The canyon continued to live its life, indifferent to human tragedies, until a group of amateur cavers disturbed its peace on November 14, 2019. 3 researchers, Mark Evans, Sarah Collins, and David Prey, received official permission to explore remote limestone systems in the Horseshoe Mesa Plateau area. Their goal was to map little-known karst cavities that are rarely visited even by rangers. Around 2 in the afternoon, the weather deteriorated sharply. According to a report from the park's meteorological service, gale force winds of up to 45 miles per hour suddenly picked up in this sector, causing a localized sandstorm. Visibility dropped to a few feet. Mark Evans, the group's leader, later stated in his explanation to the police that it was impossible to continue across the open plateau. The group began to seek shelter at the base of a rocky massif, deviating from the planned route by 1.5 miles to the west. As they made their way along the canyon wall, David Prey spotted a strange depression, almost completely hidden by thick, dried brush. This place was not marked on any of the maps they had. After pushing apart the thorny branches, the researchers found a narrow hole, no more than 2 feet wide, leading deep into the rock. To escape the sand that clogged their eyes and airways, the group took turns squeezing in. They found themselves in a dry, isolated grotto measuring approximately 10 by 12 feet. The air was musty, with a distinct odor of mold and something sour that resembled the smell of spoiled food. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness and the beams of the headlamps cut through the gloom, Sarah Collins screamed. In the far corner of the cave was a pile of what they first took to be old rags or abandoned equipment. But the rags were stirring. On closer inspection, it turned out to be a person. A woman was sitting in the corner, curled up in a fetal position with her knees pressed to her chin. Her appearance was so shocking that, according to Mark Evans, they were numb with horror for a few seconds. The woman was critically emaciated, her body resembling a skeleton covered in parchment skin of an earthy hue. It was obvious that she hadn't seen sunlight for months, perhaps years. The most frightening detail, however, was her hair. It was pitch white, devoid of any pigment, and it came down in tangled, dirty strands to her lower back. It resembled a spider's web that entangled her fragile body. The woman did not react to the appearance of people. She did not blink when the 800 lumens beam of the flashlight hit her directly in the face. Her eyes looked through the rescuers, into an emptiness known only to her. "We tried to talk to her, to ask her name," David Prey later told investigators, "but she just rocked back and forth and made soft throat sounds like the scraping of stones. It was not speech. It was the sound of an animal that had forgotten what a voice is." Examination of the cave showed that this place had been inhabited for a long time. Next to the woman was an old 5-gallon plastic canister with the remains of a cloudy liquid. 3 tin cans of canned food stood against the wall. The labels were missing, and the metal was covered with rust. A primitive bedding made of small animal skins and the remains of an old sleeping bag was also found, which could not be identified due to dirt and wear. The evacuation took over 4 hours. The medical service helicopter arrived on the Horseshoe Mesa Plateau at 17 hours and 40 minutes. The woman, who did not resist but did not help the rescuers, was loaded onto a stretcher. She weighed less than 85 pounds. At 18 hours and 15 minutes, the plane landed at the helipad of Flagstaff Medical Center. The patient was immediately admitted to the intensive care unit. Given her condition and lack of documents, the police requested a fingerprinting procedure. Flagstaff police officer Jason Miller performed the fingerprint scan at 19 hours and 20 minutes. When the system returned the result, the officer on duty double-checked the data before notifying his superiors. The prints matched 100%. The woman with white hair who looked to be in her 50s was in fact Tina Medina, the same Tina who would have been only 31 years old at the time of the discovery. A medical examination conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Wong revealed a horrifying picture of what this woman had gone through. The doctor's report stated, "Complete atrophy of the vocal cords due to prolonged silence." Tina was physically unable to speak. Her laryngeal muscles had degraded. She was diagnosed with the most severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder, with signs of dissociative fugue. But the most alarming were the results of the X-ray examination. The pictures showed multiple old fractures, 3 ribs on the left side, and a complex crack of the right ankle. All of these injuries had healed, but the bones had not fused properly, forming bone calluses and deformities. This meant that Tina had received these injuries a long time ago, perhaps as early as 2014, and had gone through a period of unbearable pain without any medical care, painkillers, or fixation. Tina returned from the world of the dead, but it was only a physical shell. Her mind remained somewhere in the darkness of the cave. While the doctors tried to stabilize her condition, the detectives examined the clothes they found her in. They were rags sewn from coarse cloth and pieces of other people's clothes using animal tendons. During the sanitization, the nurse noticed a detail that made even experienced investigators shudder. On Tina Medina's wrists and ankles, ring scars were clearly visible. The skin there was rough, dark, and similar to tree bark. These were marks from prolonged wearing of fetters or shackles. Tina was not just lost and survived 5 years in the cave. Someone kept her there. And that someone was probably still at large. Friends, before we continue to dive into the darkest details of this case, I ask you to support the channel. It will only take you 1 second, but it will make a huge difference. Click the subscribe button, like this video, and write any comment, even a few words. By doing so, you will signal to YouTube's algorithms that this investigation is worth watching, and many more people who are interested in the truth will be able to see it. Thank you for your support. And now let's get back to the story of Tina Medina. The return of Tina Medina from the world of the dead became the top story in Arizona for exactly 24 hours. On November 15, 2019, the Department of Public Safety classified all case files. The official version for the press remained vague. The woman was found, her condition was stable, and the circumstances were being investigated. But behind the closed doors of the Flagstaff offices, a completely different atmosphere prevailed. Detective Mark Hall, who was assigned to oversee the investigation, immediately realized that the theory of voluntary hermitry, or simple wandering in the canyon, was falling apart. Tina was not lost. Someone had hidden her. The first place that could provide answers was the very cave where a group of cavers had found the woman. On November 16th, a forensic laboratory arrived there. An examination of the grotto revealed a detail that the rescuers had missed in their panic. The entrance to the crevice was blocked by stones from the inside. It was not a natural collapse. Boulders weighing more than 50 pounds were stacked in a certain sequence to form a barricade. To move them out of the way and block the entrance required considerable physical strength, which the exhausted Tina certainly did not have. This indicated that she had not been walled in from the outside. She, or someone who was with her, had tried to block off the outside world. Inside the cave, there was a smell that one of the forensic scientists described in his report as a mixture of animal musk and human despair. On the limestone walls, in the deepest corner, an ultraviolet beam picked up hundreds, thousands of small notches. They were scratched with a piece of sharp flint. Groups of 7 lines. It was a calendar. Experts counted over 1,800 marks. Tina counted every day of her 5-year imprisonment, turning the wall into a stone chronicle of her horror. However, the most compelling evidence of the crime was not in the cave, but in the intensive care unit of the medical center. When Tina's condition stabilized enough for the doctors to conduct a full examination of her skin, they called Detective Hall. Deep, old ring scars were found on both of the woman's ankles. The skin in these areas was rough, deformed, and had a characteristic dark purple hue. "These are not shoe marks or rubbing with clothing," Dr. Richards, a forensic expert, noted in the report. "They are classic strangulation furrows from prolonged mechanical stress." Her legs were shackled. Probably a metal chain or coarse rope was used, which had cut into the soft tissue over the years. These marks crossed out any theories of an accident. Tina Medina spent these 5 years tied up like an animal. Her freedom was limited to the radius of the chain. The next step was to analyze the microparticles. Tina's clothes, the same rags sewn from scraps, were sent to a laboratory in Phoenix. Forensic scientists collected dust from under the woman's fingernails, from the pores of her skin, and from the seams of her clothes. The results of the spectral analysis, which came back 3 days later, were a turning point in the investigation. The samples revealed a high concentration of malachite and azurite, minerals that accompany copper ore deposits. The geologists involved in the consultations were categorical. There are no such minerals in the limestone cave on the Horseshoe Mesa Plateau where Tina was found, and cannot be. The closest deposit of this type is located a few miles to the east in the Grandview Point area. It was there that copper mines operated in the late 19th century, but they were closed and mothballed in the early 20th century. This meant that the cave where the woman was found was only a temporary shelter, or the end point of her route. Her real place of detention, her prison, was somewhere in the labyrinths of the old Grandview mines. Tina herself remained mute. She was physically in a hospital room, but mentally, she was still hiding in the dark. The nurses noticed one frightening feature. Every time a man in heavy shoes walked down the hallway and the sound of his footsteps echoed across the linoleum, Tina would panic. She would instantly cover her head with her hands, pull her neck into her shoulders, and start shaking, trying to become invisible. This sound, the heavy, rhythmic pounding of her soles, was a trigger for her, a signal of an approaching threat. Dr. Emily Warren, a psychiatrist who specialized in working with kidnapping victims, knew that direct questions were useless now. Tina's voice was dead, but her hands could still speak. Dr. Warren brought a sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils into the room. She put them on the table by the bedside and sat down next to her without saying a word. 2 hours of complete silence passed. Tina stared at the white sheet of paper motionlessly. Then, very slowly, her hand, covered with small scars, reached for a black pencil. Her fingers gripped the stylus so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She brought the pencil to the paper, but did not begin to draw. She froze, as if listening to something that only she could hear. Her eyes, which focused on the subject for the first time in days, showed an expression not of fear, but of icy determination. Tina was ready to show what the abyss was hiding. While Tina Medina was in the sterile silence of room 304 at the Zay Hayden Center in Flagstaff, trying to put the pieces of her psyche back together, the Coconino County Police Department was in the midst of a very different kind of work. Detective Mark Hall knew that the 5 years of silence could not have been a coincidence. The kidnapper hadn't appeared out of nowhere on the day Tina disappeared. He had to have left traces before, shadows on the periphery of vision, small incidents that seemed insignificant at the time, but now, in light of the new facts, took on a sinister meaning. On November 18, 2019, a special investigative team began a total review of the National Park Service archives for 2014. They were interested in the period 2 to 3 months before Tina's disappearance. Detectives were looking for any reports of strange people, conflicts on the trails, or missing property. What they found made the investigators hold their breath. In September of 2014, exactly 1 month before Tina set foot on the trail, the log of the ranger on duty at Desert View Sector recorded a series of complaints from hikers. All of the incidents occurred along the tagged trail, a remote and unpopular trail that runs parallel to the river. Tourists reported strange thefts. It wasn't money or gadgets that disappeared from their tents, but specific items needed for long-term survival. A report dated September 12 noted the disappearance of 2 down sleeping bags, a box of AA batteries, and 20 cans of canned meat. On September 14th, another group reported the theft of a gas burner and water filters. At the time, these incidents were attributed to local vagrants or the negligence of the tourists themselves, who might have lost the equipment. But one report, dated September 27, 2014, stood out from the rest. A hiker named Robert Vance reported to the rangers an encounter with a ghost. Vance had stopped for the night at a wilderness campsite, and around 6 in the morning, when he came out of his tent, he noticed a man on a rocky outcropping overlooking the camp. He was standing there like a statue, looking straight at us through binoculars, Vance wrote in his written testimony. The description of the stranger was detailed. A tall man of strong build, wearing an old, faded, olive-colored military uniform, probably from the 80s. He had a Panama hat with a wide brim on his head and a huge frame backpack wrapped in camouflage netting behind his back. As soon as Vance tried to call out to the stranger, he disappeared among the rocks with unnatural speed and silence for a person of his build. Piecing together these bits of information, the FBI profilers who were brought in on November 20th drew up a psychological profile of the perpetrator. They called him the Keeper. He is a man between the ages of 40 and 50, a sociopath who has consciously abandoned civilization. He has exceptional desert survival skills and knows the geography of the canyon perfectly, including forgotten paths and water sources. He doesn't kill his victims immediately because his goal is not death, but control, said Dr. Alan Grant, the leading profiler, in his conclusion. He creates his own world underground, a distorted reality where he is God and master. He needs company, living exhibits for his collection, which he rescues from the outside world. Experts also assumed that the subject had professional skills in mining or engineering, as he was able to set up a safe hiding place in the emergency mines. This detail was the key. Detective Hall sent a request to the Arizona Department of Mines records. Investigators checked the lists of employees of all mining companies that had explored or abandoned mines in the Grand Canyon area over the past 15 years. The computer algorithm produced a match on November 21st. Among the hundreds of names, one popped up: Harlan Briggs. Briggs was the chief safety engineer at Last Chance Mining. The company tried to resume copper mining in the park's buffer zone in the late 2000s, arguing that it had old mineral rights. Harlan Briggs was responsible for inspecting the old tunnels, ventilation systems, and supports. His personnel file noted that he knew the layout of the underground workings better than anyone else alive. Colleagues described him as a withdrawn person, obsessed with ideas about the imminent end of the world and the need to hide underground. In 2010, the license of the Last Chance Mining Company was finally revoked due to violations of environmental standards. This was a blow to Briggs. He took the closure of the mines as a personal insult. Detectives immediately checked his last known residence. Briggs owned a small house in the town of Williams, 60 miles from the canyon. Real estate records showed that in May of 2011, he sold the house for cash, well below market value. When the police interviewed Briggs' former neighbors in Williams, they remembered the man with awe. Mrs. Dolores, who lived across the street, said that Harlan often talked about cleansing and that true life was only possible in the bowels of the earth. The day he left, he loaded his old pickup truck with boxes of tools, generators, and weapons, she testified. "I'm going to live on the ground, Dolores, where your laws can't get to me." No one has seen him since. He did not pay taxes, did not renew his driver's license, did not use bank cards. Harlan Briggs had officially turned into a ghost. But now, the ghost had a name. Detective Hall looked at a 10-year-old photograph of Briggs. A hard face, cold eyes, and a scar above his eyebrow. He realized that this man had had 9 years to prepare his fortress. He wasn't just hiding, he was waiting. And Tina was not the only one who could have fallen into his trap. In the top drawer of the detective's desk was a list of the missing in the canyon over the past decade. Now this list looked not like a list of accidents, but like a predator's menu. On February 14, 2020, exactly 3 months after the Miraculous rescue, an event occurred in the ward of the Zay Hayden Center that changed the course of the investigation. Until that moment, Tina Medina remained in a deep catatonic stupor, communicating with the staff only by nodding her head. But that morning, during an art therapy session with Dr. Emily Warren, something inside her shifted. Tina was sitting in front of a blank sheet of A-frame paper. For 40 minutes, she just stared at the white surface, not moving. And then, with a sudden, almost convulsive movement, she grabbed a charcoal pencil. She didn't start writing the words that the investigators had dreamed of. She began to draw. It was not a child's drawing or abstraction. Tina drew with the topographical precision she had learned at the geology department. Her hand moved quickly. Her strokes were hard and aggressive, breaking the pencil's stylus. When she finished, the doctors had a map in front of them. But it was a map of the unknown Grand Canyon, a view not from an observation deck down, but from a deep gorge up. The picture clearly showed the outline of a massive rock with a flat top. The geologists immediately recognized this silhouette. It was the Throne of Votan, a well-known isolated remnant on the north side of the canyon. But the angle of view was unusual. Tina painted it as seen from the deepest, blind zones beneath the Horseshoe Mesa Plateau. At the bottom of the sheet, at the foot of the rocks, Tina depicted a black, irregularly shaped hole. It was the entrance to the dungeon. A human figure stood next to it. The drawing was sketchy, but that made it even more eerie. The figure had unnaturally long arms that hung below the knees, and in one of them was a clearly drawn rifle with a telescopic sight. It was a portrait of her guardian, the very guardian whose image was distorted by the victim's traumatized psyche. But the most important detail that made Detective Mark Hall call an immediate meeting was another object in the drawing. Tina depicted an old, skewed ore wagon standing on rails that led nowhere. On the side of the rusted trolley, she clearly drew a logo, an equilateral triangle with the capital letter E-L inscribed inside. Detective Hall sent a copy of the drawing to the National Park historian, Dr. Samuel Green. A response came back in less than 2 hours. "This logo belongs to the Last Chance Mining Company," the historian said during an emergency video conference, which was active in this region in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They specialized in the extraction of high-grade copper. Most of their facilities were closed in 1977 when the area was designated a national monument. But the most interesting thing is that their main adits were located just under the eastern edge of the Horseshoe Mesa Plateau. Tina added another detail to the drawing that was missing from the official maps. In a narrow vertical crevice hidden behind a rock ledge, she drew a small rectangular structure. It was a metal hut sheathed with corrugated iron sheets. Its location was so skillfully chosen that it was physically impossible to see it from the air or from a hiking trail. It blended in with the color of the rusty sandstone and was covered by a stone cornice on top. Detective Hall laid out a topographic map on the table and superimposed the data from Tina's drawing on it. The result was stunning. The place the victim had drawn, the old Last Chance mining adits under Wotan's throne, was more than 4 miles away from the cave where a group of cavers had found Tina in November of 2019. This discovery completely changed the picture of the crime. The cave where the woman was found was only a temporary shelter, perhaps a place where she reached with her last strength after her escape, or a quarantine zone where her kidnapper moved her. But the real lair, the Guardian's main base, where he likely held Tina for most of those 5 years, was much deeper, in a maze of old mines. 4 miles across the rugged terrain of the Grand Canyon is a tremendous distance, especially for an emaciated person with broken bones. The fact that Tina was able to make it was borderline miraculous, but it also meant that the police were looking in the wrong place. All previous raids had centered around the rescue site, the true heart of the darkness, the place where evidence of other crimes and possibly other victims might have been located, remained untouched. Detective Hall walked over to a large map on the wall and circled a sector called the blind spot with a red marker. This was an area of old workings that was considered too dangerous even for experienced rangers because of the risk of cave-ins and the presence of poisonous gases. This is where Tina's charcoal pencil pointed. There, among the abandoned tunnels and rusty iron, was the answer to the question of why Tina drew the trolley in such frightening detail. "Prepare a SWAT team and mining equipment," Hall ordered his assistant. "We're going underground." He looked at the drawing again. Tina hadn't just painted a landscape. She had drawn a map of her hell, and the entrance to it was marked with a triangle with the letter L. Now the investigators knew where to go, but they had no idea what exactly the Guardian had prepared for the uninvited guests in his underground fortress. The operation, codenamed Red Dawn, began on February 12, 2020, at 5:30 in the morning. A combined unit of SWAT team members, federal agents, and elite National Park Service rangers moved into the sector that Tina Medina had labeled the blind spot in her drawing. This was the area of old workings beneath the Horseshoe Mesa Plateau, an area where no tourist had set foot in over 100 years. The weather conditions were difficult. The temperature dropped to -3 degrees Celsius, and strong, gusty winds made it impossible to use aircraft at low altitudes. The Operation Command decided to use military-grade unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with highly sensitive thermal imagers. At 6:42, the drone's operator, Sergeant Derek White, reported an anomaly. On the monitor screen, among the cold blue spectrum of the rocks that had cooled overnight, a barely visible yellow-hot dot pulsated. It was a heat exhaust. Warm air was flowing out of a narrow, almost invisible crevice 400 feet from the plateau's edge. The temperature of the flow exceeded the ambient temperature by 15 degrees. It was ventilation. The assault team descended to the site using climbing equipment at 8:15. The entrance to the crevice was skillfully disguised. An artificial wall made of sandstone and epoxy perfectly imitated the natural terrain. If not for the heat signature, it would have been impossible to find this place visually. Behind the false wall was a massive steel door, removed from an old mine cage and reinforced with modern bolts. After using a hydraulic tool, the door gave way. What the group saw inside made even the experienced feds freeze. This was not a primitive hermit's hole. It was a full-fledged, engineered underground bunker, integrated into the system of old adits of the Last Chance Mining Company. The facility was referred to in the reports as Object Zero. The room was illuminated by the dim light of LED strips powered by a car battery pack connected to flexible solar panels that were brought outside through ventilation ducts. The air was dry, filtered, and had a slight odor of ozone and machine oil. Along the walls were metal shelves filled with provisions. There were hundreds of cans of canned food, packages of freeze-dried food, gas cylinders, and camping equipment. The markings on many items matched the lists of stolen property reported by tourists over the past 5 years. It was a warehouse capable of providing an autonomous existence for one person for decades. But the most frightening discovery was waiting for the investigators on a work table in the far corner of the bunker. An ordinary cardboard shoebox contained the collection that turned a kidnapping case into a serial murder investigation. Inside, neatly tied with rubber bands, were driver's licenses. Detective Mark Hall, wearing sterile gloves, began to place the cards on the table. One by one. 12 ID cards. 12 names of people who had been reported missing in or around the Grand Canyon for the past 10 years. Among them were tourist IDs from California, Nevada, Utah, and even Germany. Each card was a trophy of sorts, proof that the canyon didn't just take people away. The Guardian took them away. The owner of the bunker was not inside. However, he left behind something more than his belongings. On the table, next to a box of documents, were 3 thick, leather-bound notebooks. They were diaries. The handwriting in them varied from calligraphic to torn, almost unreadable, indicating the author's progressive madness. The texts described a monstrous philosophy. The author called his actions purification experiments. He wrote about creating a new civilization underground, where people would be free from the poison of the outside world. The records recorded in detail the process of breaking the personality of the abductees. Tina Medina was referred to in these texts as subject number 4. Subject number 1 was too weak. His heart stopped on the 3rd day of silence, read an entry from 2010. Subject number 3 was constantly screaming. We had to take him away. But he wrote about Tina with a respect that bordered on obsession. Subject number 4 has potential. She is the only one who was strong enough to listen to the silence and not go crazy. Her hair has turned white, but her mind has become as clear as a crystal. She will become the mother of a new world. The last entry in the diary was made in ink that seemed to have not yet had time to dry completely. The date was a week before the day the cavers found Tina. The text was written in large, trembling letters, with a strong pressure that broke through the paper. She broke the lock. I underestimated the strength of her desperation. She has escaped to the upper levels. I can't risk looking for her there. The iron birds are already flying on the surface. They will come here. Object 0 has been compromised. I have to go deeper, into the labyrinth, where even the devil is afraid to go without a flashlight. Detective Hall looked up from the diary and looked into a dark opening in the back wall of the bunker, where it was chilling. It was a passage to the lower horizons of the mine, a tunnel leading to an abyss that was not marked on any map. The raid on Black Mass did not end the hunt. It only showed that the real horror lies much deeper, and the Guardian is now in his element, in a place he called the Labyrinth, waiting for those who dare to follow him into hell. On February 13, 2020, Harlan Briggs officially became the most wanted man in the state of Arizona. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, having received data on the contents of the Object 0 bunker, classified his actions as serial kidnappings with aggravating circumstances. The psychological profile, updated after analyzing the diaries, indicated that the subject had no plans to surrender. The profilers were confident. Briggs, having lost his underground base, would try to go where he felt at home, to the wild, sparsely populated territories of North Rome. The operational headquarters blocked all key highways. Particular attention was paid to the Jacob Lake area, an isolated transportation hub that is the gateway to the northern part of the Grand Canyon. In winter, this area is practically deserted due to snowdrifts and the closure of most tourist attractions. It was there, at the intersection of Highway 89 and Road 67, that a reinforced checkpoint was set up. At 14 hours and 15 minutes, Highway Patrol Officer Thomas Reed spotted an old, rust-covered, dark blue Ford 8050 pickup truck. The car was moving from the forest, trying to drive onto an asphalt road. But when it saw the flashing lights of police cars, it turned around. There were no license plates on the pickup, and the rear window was covered with black plastic. The chase began. Officer Reed radioed in the coordinates and began the pursuit. The suspect turned onto Forest Road number 22, a dirt road that leads deep into the Kaibab Plateau. In winter, this road becomes a trap of snow and mud. Briggs's pickup truck, equipped with off-road tires, plowed through the drifts, throwing clouds of snow dust from under the wheels. The speed of the pursuit on the difficult section reached 50 miles per hour. After 9 miles of racing, the old Ford's engine failed. The car skidded on a curve and crashed into the trunk of a massive yellow pine tree. When the recovery team arrived at the crash site 3 minutes later, the cab was empty. Heavy boot tracks were clearly visible in the snow, leading east toward the cliffs overhanging the canyon. The foot phase of the operation had begun. 3 SVAT assault teams and 2 canine teams with bloodhound dogs trained to work on cold trails took part in the operation. The Kaibab Plateau is located at an altitude of over 8,000 feet above sea level. The thin air and deep snow made every step a challenge. Briggs, despite his age and exhaustion, moved at an amazing speed, using terrain features to confuse the trail. The chase lasted 6 hours. The dogs lost their scent several times due to the strong wind blowing from the canyon. It was only at 20 past 10, when the sun had already set and the temperature had dropped to -12 degrees Celsius, that the advance team drove the fugitive into a dead end. Briggs found himself on a narrow, rocky outcrop that plunged into a 3,000-foot-deep abyss. There was no way to retreat. The beam of a tactical flashlight caught his figure. He stood on the very edge, leaning back against the void. In his right hand, he was holding a .45 caliber revolver, but the muzzle was down. According to the report of the assault team commander, Lieutenant Andrews, Briggs looked like a man who had lost touch with reality. His face was weathered to the point of blood, his eyes were sunken, and his gaze wandered, not fixed on the armed men surrounding him in a semicircle. He did not attempt to shoot. He did not threaten. He just stood there, looking at the black sky. When Lieutenant Andrews ordered him to drop his weapon and get down on the ground, Briggs did not react at first. Then he slowly opened his fingers. The revolver fell into the snow. But instead of lying down, he began to speak. His voice was quiet, hoarse, but in the absolute silence of the winter forest, every word was clearly audible. "You don't understand," he repeated monotonously, as if he were reciting a prayer. "I didn't kill them. I was hiding them. I was saving them from what was coming from above. You are all blind. You are looking at your feet, but you need to look at the stars. It is coming." The special forces made a forceful arrest. Briggs did not resist when the handcuffs were locked around his wrists. He continued to mutter about purification and heavenly fire as he was led to the evacuation vehicles. At the place of detention, investigators seized an old army backpack that Briggs had tried to take with him on his last trip. The contents of the backpack consisted of a basic survival kit, a knife, matches, a map of the starry sky, and a strange collection of stones. But in one of the side pockets, the detectives found an object that made them shudder. In a transparent plastic bag, neatly tied with a pink satin ribbon, was a strand of hair. It was long, soft, and completely white, devoid of any pigment. It was a trophy. A rapid DNA test conducted the next day at the FBI laboratory confirmed the worst fears. The genetic profile of the hair matched Tina Medina's DNA 100%. This strand was not cut 5 years ago. The structure of the cut indicated that it had been done quite recently, perhaps a few days before Tina was found. Briggs carried a piece of his victim with him as a talisman. But as detectives began to bag the evidence, one of the forensic scientists noticed that something hard was felt under the lining of the backpack. Cutting the fabric, they pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was a photograph. It was not a picture of Tina, and not the 12 people whose documents were found in the bunker. It was a face that the police had been searching for 20 years, and the owner of that face was believed to be long dead. The trial of Harlan Briggs began on March 15, 2021, in the Flagstaff District Court. This event became one of the most high-profile in the history of Arizona. The courtroom was crowded, but when the defendant entered the room, there was dead silence. Briggs, who had a haircut and was dressed in an orange prisoner's robe, looked much older than his 52 years. His gaze was blank, indifferent to the flashes of the cameras and the whispers of the audience. He did not admit his guilt, continuing to insist on the version of saving the chosen ones. The evidence gathered by Detective Mark Hall and agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was overwhelming. The diaries seized from the Object Zero bunker played a key role. The state's attorney, Elizabeth Stone, read excerpts from these entries for 4 hours. Every word written in Briggs' hand drove a nail in the coffin of his defense. The descriptions of psychological pressure, physical restraints, and a maniacal philosophy of purification left the jury in no doubt about the defendant's sanity, despite the lawyer's attempts to appeal to mental disorders. But the most powerful moment of the trial was not the diaries or the box with the driver's licenses of the disappeared people. It was the testimony of Tina Medina. She was present in the courtroom. The woman was sitting in a wheelchair, surrounded by relatives and psychologists. Her hair, still white as snow, was neatly tied back in a knot. She did not say a single word. Instead of verbal answers, her lawyer read out written testimony that Tina had compiled over several months of therapy. It was from these records that the world finally learned the truth about how she managed to escape. It was not a special operation or an assault that freed her. It was chance multiplied by desperation. In early November of 2019, Harlan Briggs fell ill. He developed a high fever, probably pneumonia caused by living in damp dungeons. He was delirious and lost track of time. Tina wrote, "He brought me water. His hands were shaking. He coughed and fell to his knees. When he was closing the lock on my chain, I heard that the mechanism did not click all the way. It was too weak to check." She waited for 6 hours until Briggs' breathing became steady and labored. Then she carefully removed the shackles. For the first time in 5 years, she was free of metal, but still a prisoner of stone. Tina described her escape as a journey through hell. She wandered through the tangled tunnels of the mines for almost a week, without food or light, guided only by the movement of the air. She drank water from puddles on the floor of the tunnels and ate lichen from the walls. It was only on the 7th day that she saw a dim light breaking through the rubble and was able to get out into the grotto where the cavers found her. In her testimony, Tina also revealed the secret of her gray hair. It did not happen gradually. It happened in the first 3 months of her captivity, at the end of 2014. She heard the hum of search helicopters. She heard the voices of rescuers passing somewhere above the ventilation shafts. She screamed until her voice broke, but the sound was lost in the rock. When the sound of the last helicopter faded and never came back, I realized that I was dead to the world, Tina wrote. Fear washed it out of my hair. On May 25, 2021, the judge announced the verdict. Harlan Briggs was found guilty on all charges, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and grievous bodily harm. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He was sent to serve his sentence in the high-security Florence prison, where he is kept in solitary confinement, isolated from the underworld he loved so much. After the trial, Tina Medina disappeared from public space. She moved with her parents to a quiet suburb of Sedona, away from crowds and journalists. Doctors confirmed that her vocal cords had physically recovered, but the psychological block was stronger than the physiology. Tina never spoke out loud. Her silence became her new fortress. Today, she works remotely as a graphic designer. Her colleagues communicate with her exclusively through chats and email, not even knowing who is on the other side of the screen. In her free time, she draws. But she no longer draws dungeon maps or portraits of her executioner. She paints landscapes, red rocks, tall pines, endless sky. The only feature of her paintings is that there are never any people in them, only nature, majestic and indifferent. Tina never came close to the Grand Canyon again. For her, as well as for her family, this place ceased to be a natural wonder and turned into an open wound on the body of the planet. Her story remains in the archives of the Arizona police as a chilling reminder of the fragility of civilization. Even in the most popular tourist destinations, where millions of people pass through every year, if you step off the trail for a couple of miles, you enter a world where the laws of society disappear and time stands still. The Grand Canyon continues to keep its secrets. The bodies of the other people whose documents were found in Briggs' bunker have never been found, despite a large-scale search in the labyrinth. Perhaps Briggs was telling the truth, and he really only buried them, but did not kill them. Or maybe the abyss is just better at burying its victims than any human. Sometimes the canyon returns those it has taken, as it did with Tina, but it never brings them back the way they were before. A part of Tina's soul is forever left there in the darkness, and sometimes, when the nights in Sedona are too quiet, she can still hear the rusty trolley grinding somewhere deep under the floor.